So good morning, everybody, and welcome, welcome, welcome. I am really excited today because I have an amazing guest with me. We're going to be talking about a topic that has been on my mind for a long time now. We're going to be talking all about ADHD. So without further ado, I want to hand over to the amazing Lisa Poole. Now, Lisa is a neurodiversity coach. She's had a lot of experience in working with clients with ADHD and ASD, and she's going to be telling us all about what she's learned, sharing her expertise. So without further ado, I will hand over to Lisa. Lisa, welcome.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm really excited to be talking to you today.
Me too, thank you.
So before we start, could you just tell everybody a little bit about you,
Sure.
where your career started, and what was it that made you get into the work that you're doing now?
Sure. As you say, my name's Lisa. I run Perspective Counselling and Coaching. I'm a mum of three. I've got three boys. And yeah, until 5 years ago, I had no idea about neurodiversity. I had no idea. I mean, I had heard the words autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, all of the profiles of neurodivergence that we have. I'd heard the words. I had no personal experience, or so I thought. I had no personal experience of them. And then I met my partner, my fiance, who had two daughters in the same school as my sons. And her eldest daughter was diagnosed autistic. And so I obviously, the more I got to know them, the more I started to understand and be around some of the difficulties that her daughter experienced. And so I decided to learn and educate myself so that I could support both of them in what they needed. As our relationship progressed, we ran into some communication difficulties, and quite quickly discovered that, as is often the case, my partner was also neurodivergent. And so we were in a neurodiverse couple. We had different neurologies that meant we communicated slightly differently. We experienced emotion differently, just different than what would be considered typical. So I began thinking about helping other neurodiverse couples or parents of neurodivergent children with the experience that we had and the things that we'd learned. And so that was kind of the goal. Then the pandemic happened. I had started to study counselling at that point because I thought that's where I wanted to go, and always with the goal of doing that for neurodivergent individuals and families. But the pandemic happened, and our family went through a little bit of a transformation. So 7 of us in total: myself, my fiance, and our 5 collective children. And the difficulties of the pandemic highlighted things that our children really struggled with, and that we really struggled with. And so during the pandemic, 2 more of our children, one of my sons and my partner's youngest daughter, both got diagnoses. Her daughter with ASD, ADHD, and my son with ADHD. And then that kind of started a little ball rolling of, all those things that my son is experiencing and the things he finds difficult have always been difficult for me. And why might that be? And it should have been very obvious. But it took a little while it took a lot of research and a bit of hyper focus on the fact that women present very differently with ADHD. And that was kind of all new information to me. And so led me down a path of understanding, researching, studying all the neurodivergent profiles in order to help the whole community. So it's just kind of snowballed from there. I now have clients that are autistic. I have parents of autistic children. I have neurodiverse couples. I have ADHD clients, so we do ADHD coaching. And I have clients who have a whole load of letters and dual multi-diagnoses that we work through, and we work through to understand. So yeah, it came from personal experience of all those differences.
It's quite a journey you've been on then, Lisa. Quite a journey.
It's quite intense, yeah.
I can imagine. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today is because in the work that I do as a trauma-informed coach, I'm getting more and more clients through that either have ADHD or they think they have, right? So for me, I just think it's a really, really important topic. It's something I'd like to see coaches and therapists talking about a lot more. So tell me, if you could tell us, for people that are watching this recording, what exactly is ADHD, and could you sort of get into the symptoms? How does it show up? You mentioned something a little bit earlier, and the fact that it's very, very different in women. Just describe, sort of, talk us through a little bit about ADHD.
Sure. So if we're talking clinically, ADHD is diagnosed by a psychiatrist. That is the path that you have to go down if you want to be diagnosed with ADHD. And psychiatrists will use the Diagnostic Statistical Manual criteria, DSM-5 criteria for how ADHD presents in a person. So it's split into two sections. So this is if we're talking clinically, two sections, and those would be inattentive section. So you'd have to exhibit difficulties in careless mistakes, attention to detail, difficulties with attention, focus, losing things, being easily distracted, forgetful. That's all inattentive presentation. That's the clinical model of inattentive ADHD. That is all that clinicians go on for inattention. The second section would be impulsivity and hyperactivity, which would be fidgeting, as I say, rocking, swaying in my seat, leaving the seat when you're expected to sit, feeling of being restless, feeling of always being on a motor, always needing to do something, difficulty with engaging in an activity quietly, talking excessively, which I'm going to try not and do on this chat, struggling to wait your turn, blurting out answers, interrupting, those sorts of things are all the clinical model of impulsivity and hyperactivity. That's it. That's clinically, those are the behaviors that you have to fit in order to get a diagnosis.
Sure.
In reality, ADHD is so much more than that. But we don't use it in clinical. We don't use it in clinical practice. I've got notes here. So I'm just moving my notes over. The DSM-5, the diagnostic criteria, was designed for naughty boys in a classroom. It was designed to be able to identify children who were throwing chairs at teachers, who were acting out, who couldn't sit still, who were bouncing off the walls. And we haven't really evolved much from that. The last time it really evolved was, I'm going to say the 80s. That detail has gone from my brain, where we recognize the difference between inattentive ADHD and hyperactive ADHD, which is how it is now diagnosed. You're either inattentive, hyperactive, or combined. That is the diagnostic model. So since then, things haven't really changed. But those things that we've just listed are all examples of cognitive behavioral difficulties. They're all things that we do or need to do or struggle to do. They're all behavioral.
Sure.
Some real life examples of that would be things like missing appointments, getting behind on bills, procrastinating things that are really, really important. Lots of people present with getting into a lot of debt because they ignore final reminders, and it's not till someone's knocking on the door that then they actually take action on that. That is all behavioral difficulty with ADHD, and can get us into a lot of trouble. And then you've got things like speeding tickets and all the correlation to all of that stuff. It's all behavioral. It's all difficulties that we have
Sure.
with ADHD. Yeah, go on, sorry.
So I guess I was just going to say on that point, I guess someone looking in from the outside could say, well, that's a really disorganized person, right?
Yeah. But and everyone experiences these things. Every neurotype experiences these things to a degree. It's to what degree they affect your life is what a psychiatrist is going to look for in your assessment. That's what they're measuring, is how much do these things impact this person's life. Because everyone procrastinates. Everyone can get task paralysis, which is when you have so many things to do that you feel paralyzed and can't do any of them because there's so much to do. Everyone gets overwhelmed. Everyone, anyone can get a speeding ticket because they're distracted or bored or whatever. That's the reasons we get speeding tickets, right? It's because we're bored and just need to, everyone can be hyperactive. Everyone can be inattentive, but it's the degree at which these things present.
Is it fair to say then, because I know that lots of things in psychology are on a spectrum, so is it fair to say that ADHD is the same, that there's
Absolutely.
that kind of that spectrum of in terms of how the symptoms show up, how it affects your daily life, etc.?
Absolutely, yeah. It's like any neurodivergence. Any profile of neurodivergence is on a spectrum. Some people will struggle with some things, whereas other things are absolutely fine. For instance, we'll talk a bit more later on about dopamine, but for on a personal level, for me, you get lots of people with ADHD who really struggle with meal prep, meal planning, execution of creating a meal. Because those steps of executive function require a lot of attention and planning, and they really need you to be organized. For me, I get a huge amount of dopamine from doing all of that, so I don't struggle with that at all. I take care of food for myself. My partner and I live separately because too much neurodivergence. We're not got a big house big enough to give everyone space. But I manage the food a lot of the time for both households because I really enjoy it, and it brings me a huge sense of pleasure to make sure that they're all fed and everyone's had a lovely time. But that's dopamine. It's people pleasing, but it's dopamine. For my family, I love it. But other people might struggle to feed themselves and get through the day healthily and sustain that kind of that executive function, that basic executive function. So it is on a spectrum. Everyone's completely different. How we present is completely different.
Sure.
So there's also the link, the impulsivity. There's the link to addiction, which is also very a really important part of ADHD, is the fact that our brain does always want more. It wants dopamine. It wants a fix. It wants something.
So let's talk about that dopamine then, Lisa, because what would you say? I've heard various experts mentioning the link between ADHD and dopamine. Could you talk me through that, just so I can understand how is somebody with ADHD, how does their brain differ to other people in terms of that dopamine mechanism? What's sort of going on there?
Sure. Yeah. So I hopefully won't get pulled up by a neuroscientist by explaining this wrong. Hopefully I got this right.
Give it your best shot.
Yeah. In our brains, we have neural pathways that those electrical signals are sent down to transport messages through the brain that are used in our decision-making process, using assessing if something's safe. Any brain function is transmitted by neurons through those neural pathways. When they come to a gap, it's a normal gap, it's called a synapse in the brain. Neurotransmitters, parts of chemicals in the brain, transport the chemicals across that gap. They throw them across the gap.
Mm-hmm.
In an ADHD brain, in all brains, there's receptors on one side of the synapse that take that chemical and absorb it into the neural pathway and send it where it needs to go. That receptor in an ADHD brain doesn't accurately reuse the dopamine that we have. In a neurotypical brain, it would we reabsorb that dopamine to use it again. We keep it so that we've got dopamine for the next thing that comes along. The ADHD brain doesn't do that. And so when we look at ADHD medication, what that actually does is coats that receptor in order to pull the dopamine to keep it there so that we can then reuse it. So it's that's the reuptake inhibitors, the same as SSRIs. It's reuptake, that's for serotonin. It's the same process, but for a different chemical. So for ADHD medication are reuptake inhibitors, dopamine reuptake inhibitors. They coat it and allow us to hold on to that dopamine so we can use it. So would
you say that that's the reason why a lot of people with ADHD struggle to finish things, right? They're great at starting things, but then there's that boredom that kind of sets in down the line.
As soon as it's bored, as soon as the dopamine's gone, as soon as it gets hard, that then becomes challenging because there's not enough dopamine to keep it going. And as well, if the reward for that, if the end result is too far in the future, that we need instant gratification. Otherwise, it's just too hard. It's just the sustained effort without that dopamine is really hard to finish. Yeah.
So what are some of the challenges then that you've had yourself personally around that? I mean, where is that? I know you were talking to me a little bit earlier about you had a business sort of making t-shirts, right?
I did.
About that.
So I used to, before I did coaching, I used to design and print t-shirts and other garments and sell them on Etsy. I used to and quite good at it, quite a creative person, as a lot of ADHD people are, and love having that creative outlet to just let that flow and let it go. But the problem with doing that is I sold on Etsy, and when you sell on Etsy, you've created the item already. You've had the dopamine, the excitement of creating something. I've taken a picture of it, I've put it on Etsy, and then somebody buys it, and there's this little cha-ching noise where you've earned some money, and so you get a bit excited. You get, oh, brilliant! I've made some money today. That's fantastic. But I've made the item. I've got paid for it. The money's in my bank account. And then now it's radio silence. Nobody's there telling me I have to do it. Nobody's there. There's no excitement because I've created the item already. I've designed it. I've done the fun bit. So now I have to have the executive function of ordering stock, of cutting, it was vinyl. So cutting out vinyl, printing vinyl onto the garment, packaging, communicating with the customer, printing out labels, going to the post office, all the executive function. But I've already had the reward. I've already had what I did it for, was the creativity and the money. So I ended up, I got banned from Etsy because all my orders were late. The orders I sent were fantastic. People loved them. They were very happy with them, but I took too long because I physically couldn't manage all of that executive function without the dopamine.
Sure. And that's really, really interesting, because I know so many people would then say, oh, I'm having issues with procrastination, but actually in the ADHD brain, it's different because it's all to do with the dopamine. So that's
Absolutely
amazing how you've explained that.
Well, so procrastination's an interesting one. So yeah, lots of things can present as procrastination. So task paralysis that we mentioned before, having lots of things to do, not knowing where to start. Perfectionism is a massive part of ADHD. The fact that we want to do something, I want to do it right. I want to dedicate all my time to it and produce a really quality result, because as we'll explain later, I don't want anyone to criticize what I'm doing. I want to people please and get it right and make, create a really good experience for somebody else. But I can't do that today because it's not perfect time. I've not got enough time today. I need to do that tomorrow because tomorrow is going to be a better day for that. So it's like anything, like academic assignments and stuff. That's how I struggle with that. Is but if I know that I need to do it, and I know that I just need to have a good run at doing it, but that today's not that day because I'll have to stop in 2 hours time, or I've got an appointment this afternoon, so I can't do it today because I'll break. I'll not manage to do it all and do it all perfectly in one. So I'll not do it. So you sit there procrastinating, going over and over and over in your head as to how you're going to get that done or how you're going to manage. But in reality, it's just really hard to start and really hard to just motivate. Self-motivation is a real difficulty.
Sure. So what else would you say then are the because you've spoken about procrastination and you've spoken about perfectionism, and again, hearing you speak there, procrastination and perfectionism are words that I hear a lot in working with people who've had trauma, right? Because when you're in that survival state, again, those parts come in, those kind of self-sabotaging parts, right? So what is your view, because this is again something I'm very interested in, what is your view on the link between trauma and ADHD? I know Gabor Mate has written a book on this, Scattered Minds. I don't know if you've read it. But again, when I've looked at the symptoms of ADHD and I look at the symptoms of trauma, again, there's a huge overlap. So tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I'm going to rewind slightly to when you asked me about how ADHD presents, because what I gave you there was the clinical model. And I think it's really important to understand the other aspects of ADHD that we don't see clinically, we don't measure clinically, but are so important because that then leads on to how we experience trauma. So we'll get onto sensory dysregulation in a little while, but emotional dysregulation is one of those things that is fundamental for ADHD, and that is so there's certain things like being an emotional sponge is what I call it, is being able to, an ADHD person often is able to walk into a room and be able to sense that somebody's tone is slightly different, that somebody's facial expression is different than it was previously, that the words that they're using is not like them, it's not what they usually would speak to me like. So therefore, there's a problem. There's this, that person's got some sort of emotion going on. Now, that differs slightly from the ASD presentation, because an autistic person may notice those. It's called neuroception. The nervous system does recognize those things, but not necessarily maybe understand what that means, what's going on, be able to read that to interpret those facial expressions or that tone, just know that it's off. Whereas an ADHD person often can notice those differences, notice those changes, and either completely spiral into what that might be, and the fact that it might be to do with them, and really overthink it, or just not be able to ignore it, just it be so distracting that this other person is emotional, is dysregulated in some way, that they then take on that emotion, they sponge it up. And so you can be having the best day in the world, I could be having the best day in the world, and I come home and my partner is down, or has had a really bad day, is really upset, and I'm upset because I feed off that emotion, I take on that emotion because I can't ignore it. It distracts my brain from what I was doing, because I care so deeply about that person that I soak it in, and I think I take it in. So that's one aspect of that emotional dysregulation. The next aspect is probably the most impactful part of ADHD, which is something called rejection sensitive dysphoria.
Wow.
So rejection sensitive dysphoria is dysphoria it comes from the Greek word of hard to bear. It is basically we have intense reactions, intense emotional reactions to rejection, criticism, teasing, failure, and all of these things can be real. They can actually have happened. Somebody could have rejected us or criticized us, but they could also be perceived. So when I walk into a room and my partner's angry, my RSD immediately would say, what have I done? I've done something wrong. Because I will perceive rejection even when there is none. And that rejection sensitive dysphoria, studies show that 90% of the ADHD population experience it. And around 70% of those people would say that it's the most debilitating part of their ADHD. The reason that's not in any diagnostic, you will not find that in any diagnostic criteria. Emotions do not come into an ADHD diagnosis whatsoever. It's all physical. It's all cognitive and physical, behavioral. The reason we can't is because we can't measure it. Nobody can measure emotion. It's not empirical. So we can understand it. We can say that for some reason ADHD people experience that severely, but we don't know neurologically why. Doing the functional brain scans have been done that measure RSD, and when they've measured ADHD brains and a functional brain scan compared to a typical brain, the areas of the brain that flag up when they're exposed to rejection or criticism are the same areas of the brain as physical pain. So we can see physical pain in everyone, but in the ADHD population, that light up on the functional brain scan is a lot more. It's a lot more apparent.
Wow, interesting.
So the experience of an RSD attack, as it were, it feels like the way people sometimes describe heartbreak. So stabbing in the chest, a knot in the stomach, and so physically feel like a weight dropping out of you, just dropping into your stomach, just really intense feeling of dysregulation, of discomfort, of sadness, of however it presents for you. So when we consider trauma, taking that into account, and taking the fact that we experience that rejection sensitivity, we avoid it at all costs. So what we tend to do is do the opposite and people please, and do whatever people want in order for them to like us, or to fit in, or to stop that person from having a negative interaction with us. And that can take many forms, like not speaking our minds, not giving opinion, doing things that we are uncomfortable with, because otherwise that other person might be angry, or might cause us us that problem, that feeling of rejection or criticism. So when you think of things like abusive relationships, for example, we see a lot of undiagnosed ADHD in victims of domestic abuse, because the tendency to people please and to give the benefit of the doubt is often is quite a difficulty that some people that with ADHD have. And
so it's almost what you're describing there, Lisa, is almost the same as what we would say codependency, right? In a codependent person, the inability to express your own desires, wants, needs, feelings, etc., because you're trying to placate the others, so to speak. So
you're trying to avoid the negative interaction that makes you, and the really hard thing with ADHD and RSD in particular, and it's the reason I work a lot with teen girls. I'm trying to set up a lot more support for teen girls, is the damage it does to your self-esteem, to your the way that you view what you deserve, what you need, and how you get your needs met, and all of this. It really affects all of that. If somebody tells us, "Oh, you're not good enough," we're going to believe it, because our RSD is going to say, "Oh God, yeah, no, I'm not." If somebody says, "Well, I don't want you to go out tonight because that'll upset me." "Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. No, I won't do then. I don't want to upset you. I don't want. Oh, let's have a nice evening together." Those kind of patterns are really, because our self-esteem is usually rock bottom because of that RSD. So working with teen girls is something I'm really passionate about, because if you can instill those that knowledge early on, and teach people to recognize that when criticism or rejection is perceived, or when it's real, the fact that your brain is going to always think that you're not good enough if somebody tells you you're not. If you can help to educate younger women, we might avoid a lot of those, the statistics of domestic abuse, domestic violence, and all that comes with it further down the line.
Yeah, because again, coming back to that sort of codependency that you get in a narcissistically abusive relationship, that fawning behavior, it's a coping mechanism, it's a survival mechanism, right?
Absolutely. And fawning is absolutely right. Fawning, so in coaching, we talk about the trauma responses of fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And so many neurodivergent people, their day-to-day life is fawning, it's masking their difficulties. And so when you fall into the wrong kind of relationship, and you're doing that at home too, that's when that becomes really difficult. And then also on trauma, there's so much on trauma. We could talk for hours on trauma and ADHD. Is that linked to addiction? Because when you have dysfunctional families, and so dysfunctional parents who maybe struggle with addiction, substance abuse, gambling, whatever it comes from, and that's really important as well. Addiction doesn't have to mean doesn't have to be substance abuse, or with ADHD we even look at like sugar addiction, social media addiction. It's so much more. Shopping is a big one. I get lots of people coming to help me with that, the impulsivity of shopping and needing that dopamine fix. It's all addictive behaviors. But when we look at trauma, and we look at the fact that people may be coming from dysfunctional families, we start to see undiagnosed neurodivergence all the way through. So if you really have grown up in that environment with say an alcoholic parent or whatever, and you are ADHD, there's around about 70 to 80% chance that one of your parents is, and so there we start to see the patterns.
Wow.
So it's learning that, and learning how to not repeat those patterns.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it all, isn't it interesting how everything always goes back to childhood, right? And childhood trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
So
and children, ADHD children are said to have experienced around 40,000 more negative comments than a neurotypical child would. And that is a mixture of being told to sit down, told to stop jumping about, you know, those sorts of things.
Sure.
But and also those perceived negative comments that they interpret as well, it's an RSD reaction. So all those negative comments kind of just build into that self-esteem of, yeah, I'm not good enough, I'm bad, all of those. So if you're growing up in a dysfunctional relationship, dysfunctional family on top of that, yeah, just loads of trauma.
100%, yeah, and very, very, very typical of what we would call complex trauma as well. All those negative self-sabotaging beliefs come in through that childhood experience. Really, really interesting. I was wondering, Lisa, if you could chunk down, because again, in trauma work, people always talk about nervous system regulation, you know, and we work with a lot of sort of techniques. I do a lot of EMDR, and a lot of that is about resourcing the nervous system so that you have that internal sense of safety. Okay. So when I heard you speaking in your webinar last year, I was quite fascinated by how you were kind of chunking that down, talking about sensory, behavioral, and emotional. So do you want to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. So the reason I chunk that down, and I'm not sure that anyone else does. I think they do. But the reason I chunk that down is because the strategies that we use for regulation in each of those areas, for the behavioral, the physical dysregulation, the sensory dysregulation, and the emotional dysregulation, the strategies that we use to help regulate are different. They're vastly different for each of those areas. And because each of those areas is so significant in the presentation of ADHD, it wouldn't do well. It wouldn't work for me to use behavioral strategies for sensory dysregulation, for example. It just wouldn't work. So I separate them because they can all co-occur together. They can all, we can work out where dysregulation is coming from, and whether it is in one of those areas or all three, or it's just easier to kind of decipher what's going on by separating them. So the areas, like we said, the physical, behavioral, cognitive are all things like the procrastination and the paralysis and time blindness, and all of those things are all physical. The emotional we've talked about is the RSD, the emotional, intense emotional reactions, and not being able to ignore people's emotions, that emotional sponge. And then sensory is sensory. When we talk on an exclusive ADHD profile, we talk more, it's more common that we'd experience sensory sensitivity. Sensory processing disorder is something we see as a standalone diagnosis, but more common with an autism diagnosis, although not always, but most often. ADHD is more sensory sensitivity, so being very aware of our sensory environment, very distracted by our sensory environment, and can cause quite a lot of dysregulation, for instance, in a busy place, because there is so much information in our visual field and auditory that we are distracted by everything, and it causes us to get frustrated or emotional or angry, or it causes an emotional reaction because we can't tune any of it out to concentrate on what we need to be doing. But the strategies we use for that are entirely different than somebody who's experiencing an RSD attack. So separating those for ADHD coaching, at least, it tends to work far better. Essentially all are the same, all are to promote safety and to indicate, to put in place a strategy that makes that person feel safe, and makes them feel in control and able to do what they need to do. But the way in which we do it is different for each of those areas.
Sure. So I'm just kind of thinking, as you were speaking there, I would imagine social media it plays a big part there, right? So would you, is that one of the things that you sort of tell your clients to manage and monitor social media usage? Because I know for me personally, I have to be so careful about how much time I spend on social media, because it's too much overwhelm, far too overwhelming.
Yeah. So yes, so there's lots of little areas of social media that present difficulties. Your phone with access to all the little videos that are a couple of minutes long, and people posts and Instagram posts and pictures and all of that, it is all dopamine. It's all very easy, very accessible dopamine, and for a lot of people can be a really good way to regulate, because it is mindless dopamine. It is you can dissociate, you can just kind of, none of it matters, you don't have to pay attention, you don't have to follow a story, you don't have to do any of that, so you can just kind of zone out and get that fill of dopamine. And it can be great. By no means do I think there is a place for it. You're absolutely right. Overwhelm for a lot of people is a huge factor. I have clients who will just have to come off social media because they are too overwhelmed. A lot of the time that is as a result of rejection sensitive dysphoria, commenting on groups or posting something and somebody replying negatively, or criticizing what they're doing or what they've done or how they look is a big one. So there's those aspects of it, but also the fact that it's empty dopamine means that we just need more and more and more of it. So the brain's never really satisfied. If you were to go and watch a film, for instance, you might get really into the film, if you can hold your attention long enough, that is, if it's engaging, really into the film, come away from that film having, had maybe an emotional reaction, really enjoyed some of the actors in it. You might go and research it, you might go down a wormhole and, learn more about whatever you've just watched. All of that is kind of more productive sort of dopamine, in that it fulfills a need that sustains longer than just the time that you are watching that film. Whereas that empty dopamine of just scrolling through TikTok or scrolling through shorts on Facebook, it doesn't really fulfill the same need. It doesn't. It lasts for as long as you're watching. So then it's very difficult to stop. So yeah, I get lots of clients who would say they were addicted to social media, to the phones.
Absolutely, it's very common, right?
Yeah. And we have to work really hard on. We create I create what's called a dopamine diet. So a dopa diet, which is right at the very beginning of sessions, when I first start working with a client, we go through where they get dopamine. In an ideal world, what brings them joy, what brings them excitement, and that can be like base jumping or parachuting if that's what they like. But it can also be, going and getting a Starbucks coffee, or having a nice breakfast, or spending time with kids out of the house in the park, or walking the dog. Any of those things that just are nice are just like that we can start to use to drip feed dopamine, healthy dopamine throughout the day. And then we start using like some kind of accountability system to help with, using your phone at certain times, so that then you're productive, and then your reward is then using your phone for a certain amount of time. It works for some people. Other people struggle with the self-restraint, but it's very individual. But I have had clients where we've had to say, why, let's take it off your phone, let's put it on a laptop. YouTube, for instance, take YouTube off your phone. I have a client recently, let's take YouTube off your phone, because it's too accessible. Sure. It's not to say you can't have it, because that's not going to work either. Let's put it on laptop, so that there is more effort involved in having to go and use it, and having to go and find that content, because it's not as seamless as just picking up your phone and just scrolling. So it's not saying we'll get rid of it altogether, but it's just putting a bit of a barrier in place there. Make it harder.
Tell me about medication. What are your views on medication? Do you take medication yourself as well? Is it something that you've had experience with?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I was for a long time against medication. No, not against medication. I've always told my clients medication is wonderful. For a lot of people, it is life-changing. It's fantastic. I myself chose at the start of my coaching practice to not go for diagnosis and not go for medication, because I felt like I'm a coach, right? So I should be able to coach myself. It doesn't always, that doesn't always work. FYI, my partner does a great job of coaching me when I need it.
Every coach needs a coach, right?
I need a coach. Needs a coach and a therapist, absolutely. So I have systems in place around the house that make sure I do things. So, for instance, I don't have laundry baskets, because if I did, the laundry would go in and I would ignore it and I would never do it. The laundry sits at the top of my stairs. The kids chuck the laundry at the top of the stairs, and I can't stand the visual dysregulation of that. So it makes me do it. That makes me put it in the machine. I don't have curtains in my kitchen, so that, and it looks right out onto a pavement. So the RSD of somebody looking in my kitchen and seeing it a mess, if it is a mess and I know it is, very dysregulating, because I don't want anyone to look in and see my kitchen a mess. So it makes me do it. So I have those kind of strategies in place, and things were ticking along quite well. For me, the clincher is academic study. Not a chance without medication.
Wow.
So the ADHD brain usually presents in several different ways, and this is just my experience. This is not clinical at all. Is either we get a client who has conversations and music and like this interior monologue going round and round and round in their head, song lyrics and word associations, all of that going on constantly, just in the background, but constant noise. My partner's one of those. I call it, she's got a jukebox brain. She can just pick a song and listen to it and rewind it and pause it and all of that going on. Other people have so many thoughts, their head's so busy that they struggle to tell what thoughts they're having. Or struggle to concentrate on one long enough to see it through. Just round and round and round. The other presentation that comes is people that say, well, there's nothing in there. It's just blank. And often, actually, when they start medication, they realize that that's not actually the case. It's the fact that it's going so fast, it's a buzz that they can't, that it's just noise. It's just a buzz of activity that is completely, you can't tell what's going on. So I was kind of between the last two before medication. I don't have an audible thing going on. I don't hear music. I don't hear thoughts. I don't hear anything. And so I always thought, well, maybe I don't have ADHD. I mean, it's ridiculous to think now, because it's very, very apparent. But in the very beginning, when I started research, I was like, but I don't do any of that. I don't get it. I don't do that. So I can't do. And then I took medication for the first time, and I had never, until that point, had never understood a quiet brain. Everyone used to say quiet brain, but it's not noisy. Can't hear anything. It's not noisy. So I can't, what's quiet brain? It is quiet. It's fine. And a bit like putting on AirPods, I took medication, and the world, 40 minutes later, whatever, things just go quiet.
Wow. I guess it's a bit like putting on glasses when your vision is being affected, well, right? You haven't realized,
And like putting my AirPods in with the noise cancelling, it takes out all that background stuff, and you can just concentrate. So I describe it like before, and I didn't realize until I knew different. Before, it was like a Formula One racetrack of 30 cars going round and round and round. Each of them too fast for me to really recognize. And I kind of, I need to do, that's happening. I need to do that. I feel really rubbish about that. Like just constantly going round and round and round, constant input. But that was normal. That's just how my brain worked. And when I take medication, it felt like one car could come round, and I'd go, all right, okay, let's deal with that. Let's sort that out. Let's fix that. Yeah, okay. Another car comes. Oh, no, you're just going to have to wait. I'm dealing with this just now. Finish that. Right, come on then. Next job, next thing we need to do, next thought to have. Slowed everything down and was quiet.
I love
no
that analogy
background.
of the car, actually. I really like that.
Yeah. So
Mm.
now it doesn't happen for everyone. Medication isn't for everyone. Some people don't respond to stimulant medication.
Mhm.
Some people need non-stimulants. Some people are just not chemically receptive to ADHD meds at all. It's a
Sure.
small portion, but it can happen. It doesn't mean you've not got ADHD. And by all means, you don't have to medicate.
Mhm.
When you are diagnosed by a psychiatrist, you are often recommended having a two-pronged approach to treatment, which is medication and coaching.
Mhm.
But you by no means need to do just you by no means don't have to do both. You can do just one. If
Sure.
you feel you can manage without it, then that's absolutely fine. In my practice, my ADHD clients, it's 60-40 split of
Mm.
60% medicated, 40% choose not to. So
And what about supplements, Lisa? Have you had any sort of experience with nutritional supplements?
I have clients who have. I don't myself, for medical reasons. They've got contraindicators to medication I'm on, so I don't myself take any. I'm always offered them by the reps of the companies, but I haven't partaken in any. There is great evidence to suggest that some supplements are beneficial.
Mhm.
Just like protein is very good for the ADHD brain.
Oh, wow.
So it is recommended when you take supplements or medication that you have them with protein. It helps them work better. So
Mm.
I think there's great scope for supplements to work and to be really beneficial. I don't know enough about them, and
Sure.
it's one of the things that I tend not to recommend to clients for not that I don't recommend them. I don't advise on them because I don't know enough, and I
Sure.
don't know anyone's medical history, so I kind of try not
Mm.
get involved in that. And when clients actually ask me for recommendations, I don't give them.
Sure.
Um, I allow them to do that research themselves because the clinical responsibility I think is too great. So I tend not to. Same with medication. If they ask me advice on medication, I can advise as to what medications are available, and I can help with things like advice on taking them. For instance, don't take them with orange juice or anything with absorbic acid because they won't work. You're never told that in assessment.
Mhm.
So I can advise on those things, but in terms of dosage and what medication is right, I refer back to your psychiatric nurse prescriber for that
Sure.
because it's not my expertise.
So, Lisa, from a practical perspective, if anyone's watching this and they're really struggling to sort of focus and concentrate, could you give them just a couple of top tips? What simple things can people sort of start with now that will help them?
Yeah.
And I'm sort of talking from a work perspective, because I know lots of entrepreneurs. That was another question I was going to ask you, actually. Lots of sort of entrepreneurs, online business owners in the circles that I mix in online.
Yeah.
More and more people are being diagnosed with ADHD or think that they have ADHD. So what tips can you give to people like that that will just sort of help them with focusing, concentration,
Yeah.
sort of moving themselves
So
along?
so in terms of the practical aspect, the physical, behavioral, cognitive dysregulation, the way in which we make the ADHD brain do anything, we use an acronym, RAN. So reward, accountability, and novelty. So increasing the reward of something, and it has to be an instant reward. If it's too far in the future, we're not interested. It needs to be instant gratification, which is it's really useful when parenting as well, to recognize that giving children rewards, it's fantastic for ADHD. It's dopamine, provided the rewards are sustainable. But having it too far in advance. If I say to my sons, all of which I suspect are ADHD, oh yeah, if you go to bed all month, you get pocket money or whatever at the end of the month, they're not going to do it. The reward's too far in the future. It needs to be instant. So same with adults, it doesn't change. We need that instant gratification. So increasing the reward, sometimes it depends what it is. Accountability is your friend. Accountability is the most the most effective way to get the brain to do anything. And it's because of that RSD. The RSD is so much to answer for. It's so ingrained in all of the ADHD dysregulation we feel. It's why perfectionism's so important. Why procrastination happens is we want to do it right to not disappoint people. We want to do it right to do a good job so people don't criticize. It's rooted in everything, really. It's ridiculous that it's not part of the criteria, but it's just not measurable. We can't measure it. So the train of thought. So the
talking about accountability.
Accountability. So increasing the accountability is a kind of a surefire way, provided that accountability is enough to get that external motivation. So that could be, I get lots of people coming to me wanting to be able to go to the gym, wanting to be able to have a healthy lifestyle of exercise and classes and the gym and all of that, but getting themselves there really, really, really struggling. So using that as an example, we would increase the accountability by booking a class so a teacher's waiting for you, going with somebody else, because that person, if you don't go, you let that person down and change their plans. So that's not worth it. So any of those things that just make you kind of accountable to someone else is really good. When you have big projects at work, and this is when I have uni students, I have PhD students that need to do this, where you have a massive body of work that needs doing. It's incredibly overwhelming to think that, well, I have this to do, but I have 9 months to do it in. But it'll be fine. I will leave it. I'll do it. And I know myself, when I did my degree, the last 12 hours before any assignment was in the library, because I couldn't do it until then without that time pressure, without the accountability of knowing that if I did not submit it, my lecturer would be disappointed. Sure. Made me do it in that last 12 hours. Not a chance before that. So when I have PhD clients or anyone else with big bodies of work, we have to increase the accountability by breaking that down, first of all, into sections, chapters, whatever, and saying, whoever you are, whoever is able to mentor you, whether it's, if it's in a university or whatever, is booking in a date, time, meeting to present your introduction on this date. That's when your introduction is due. Then the first chapter, for instance, a month from now, that's when that's due. I expect you here to show me in a month that first chapter. So we increase that accountability while breaking up the task.
Right.
It's interesting you say about entrepreneurs, ADHD, because the last thing in the acronym is novelty. So
right, okay,
being different every day is a massive drive. That excitement of never being boring. So we see ADHDers in the music industry, entertainment industry in general, because of the excitement, dopamine, it's ever changing. I have got lots of nurses, paramedics, doctors, and you usually find doctors and nurses in emergency departments and intensive care and those sorts of roles, because they gravitate towards them because they're exciting. They're different. They're full of adrenaline, so it feeds that dopamine. The clients that I find struggle with work most are clients that come in and say they're doing data processing or they're working in a factory, and it's boring. The novelty is not there. The accountability might be because the job, the boss, the co-workers, the reward is because of the paycheck, although that's a month in advance, so a month away, so it's often not enough. But the novelty is not there. The excitement's not there. So they don't sustain their attention.
Do you know what? I can 100% relate to that. I think that was one of the reasons why I went self-employed. I started my own business, was because the boredom, even in jobs that I really enjoyed, the boredom in terms of just doing the same thing every day, for me, I have to have that sense of that novelty and that feeling like I'm progressing and I'm evolving. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. The monotony of 9 to 5, it just feels so restrictive to a lot of people, because it's like
100%.
you don't have the freedom to follow the dopamine on days where you really need it. If you're not in a situation where you can do that, you can see why that would be really, really difficult, because you then just, struggle to start tasks, struggle to get work done, to focus and concentrate, because why do you, there's nothing making you.
Sure.
And then obviously the flexibility of being self-employed, the fact that, you can take a day off to go do something exciting. You can take a day off to spend, to fill up your dopamine bucket, and spend time with family or whatever. It's so appealing, because otherwise you're restricted.
Sure.
Yeah.
So apart from medication, and I know we've spoken a lot about accountability, what are some quick ways, some quick tips for people? How can I boost my dopamine levels, apart from going to the gym, because I know that works really well for me? Or in the summertime when the sun's shining, it seems to be so much easier, right? Because sunshine always gives you that dopamine. But what are some other ways that we can get more dopamine into our lives? What would you say?
Well, you mentioned the gym there, and I'll just quickly say that the reason the gym works is to do with your sensory system. So when we're taught about our sensory system, we're taught about touch, taste, sight, smell, sound. That's your audio, your audible, your visual, your tactile, your olfactory, and your gustatory senses. That's your sensory system.
Sure.
When we look at neurodivergence, we actually add 3 extra senses that we have to consider, and they are your proprioceptive sense, your vestibular sense, and your interoceptive sense. Interoception, not so much of a consideration for solely ADHD. It's more of an autism spectrum thing. But the proprioceptive sense and your vestibular sense are really, really important for regulation and organizing your brain and organizing your thoughts with ADHD. So proprioception is where your body is in space, and how your body is in relation to its environment. So, for instance, feeling resistance of the back of the chair is much more regulating than if I was sat on a stool and I would be bounding all about. The chair gives me a sense of safety and comfort, and so therefore provides me that sensory input. Sleeping with things around us is a proprioceptive thing, behavior. Proprioception comes in many forms. It is the receptors are all in your joints. So any activity that you do that provides resistance to your joints, it is proprioceptive input, and you can never get enough proprioceptive input. It's extremely regulating. So for any neurodivergent person, it's extremely regulating. The difficulty with ADHD is getting us there, getting us to sport, to gym. So the things that you can do around the house that are, so obviously swimming, yoga, Pilates, weight training, all of those things are proprioceptive. So if you can do those, great. And if you can add in the accountability of booking a class, even better, because it makes you do it. But if you can't do that, if that's too difficult, then there are things around the house you can do. We call it heavy work. So anything that provides resistance, housework, hoovering, carrying laundry baskets, anything that makes your body work is a good example.
Mowing the lawn, I guess, would be a good one, right?
Yeah. And that will bring me on to vestibular in a minute, because that's the same thing. But an example of how proprioception helps, and I'll use my kids as an example. If we are out for a walk, and that can be quite dysregulating for them because it's big open space, and sometimes that's just quite daunting. Is being out in a big open space, don't know quite what to do with their body. And often when they were younger, we used to, this is going to sound really bad, let me finish, because it's going to sound awful. We used to put the dog lead around them. And I don't mean we used to clip it on, but we used to put it round and say, right, you're the horse. And they would pull us up the hill with the dog lead round. And that resistance, that extra effort that their body would help to ground them, to make them feel more feel safer in the space, feel safer in the body. It's more resistance. So it's regulating.
That makes complete sense. I'm
yeah.
just thinking of some of the nervous system regulation techniques that I use, and it's all about, you know, back against the chair, feet flat on the floor, all very kind of somatically focused. So and it does, as you say, it gives people a sense of safety in their bodies.
It's all proprioception. So joint compression would be a good one to use there. Is really just pulling and squeezing your joints. I mean, it's supposed to be done by a practitioner, but it's really just being able to move your joints and squeeze them and feel them is proprioceptive input. It's why stress balls work. It's the same. Your joints in your knuckles are still joints. That's why they work.
Yeah.
And there's lots of activities we do for regulation on that. Vestibular is the next sense, which is movement. So your vestibular sense is there's the receptors. It's a little pool of water in your inner ear that is regulated by what we call linear vestibular movement, which is movement that's forwards, backwards, side to side, up and down. It helps to regulate your body. It determines safety because you know kind of where you're going, and that the motion is regulating because it's repetitive. So things like swimming, things like cycling, rocking, any sport that basically makes you move is vestibular. You mentioned mowing the lawn. It's vestibular because you're pacing. You're essentially pacing, very regulating. If I have clients that really struggle with anxiety and become really dysregulated, we direct them to rock. So I have lots of teen clients who don't feel they can do that in class at school, and that's absolutely fine. So we have them go to the bathroom and just take 5 minutes and just sit there and just rock, because what that's doing is helping to regulate their body to bring it back to some sort of calm.
Sure.
Well, you see neurodivergent children a lot spinning, and spinning is fantastic. Spinning is incredibly regulating to your vestibular sense. It does a fantastic job, fantastic, until it really doesn't. It just goes completely the opposite, because you spin it too much and it becomes incredibly dysregulating. So when we have neurodivergent children that exhibit that stimming behavior, it's repetitive, obsessive behavior, we try redirect to rocking because it's actually far more regulating. Right. So anything that makes the head move back and forward. Remind me of your initial question. It was going to the gym. What other things help, wasn't it?
We were talking about how to boost your dopamine levels naturally, right? So
so that, and then it is working out what actually it is that brings you joy. What brings you dopamine? So it could be that spending time with family is there. So we prioritize these things that we know are healthy dopamine. I'll use an example of a client recently who, in a data processing job actually, and living at home with the in-laws, and so struggling with relationships, with that, and struggling at work because it's data processing and boring and monotonous, and working from home, and really contained in that kind of environment that's just not really suitable. So we've rejigged everything and put in place the fact that at some point in the day, lunch hour, getting out for a walk, because it just brings a little bit of dopamine, a little bit of something. And we have the accountability. So in sessions, I'll ask, did you manage every day? How many days did you manage? That accountability to report back to me helps her to do that.
So finding those little glimmer moments throughout your day that you can, that work for you, that you can kind of incorporate into your routine. It makes complete sense.
And recognizing when you need something. So my partner and I will both walk around the house sometimes and go, oh, I need something. Like the easiest thing is going to be chocolate or sitting on my phone. Sure. But recognizing that I need something. That's your body saying I need some dopamine. So then it's making an active choice as to how you get that then. How are you going to get that dopamine? Sure. Now you could choose to go on your phone, but we know the pitfalls of that. So it's almost making a conscious choice. And if I work with couples, and that's a struggle that some people have, the other partner, the non-ADHD partner, I'm not going to say neurotypical, because often both partners are neurodivergent because we attract each other. the other partner being able to direct the ADHD partner to a list of activities is good accountability. So having somebody else say, yeah, you need something. I'll say to my partner, oh, she'll walk around looking in cupboards, and I'm like, you need something.
Sure.
So we'll put on music, or we'll. Yeah. So it's simple as that. It's looking for the good dopamine. And sometimes we need a bit of help to do that, but yeah, it works.
Yeah. And I guess it all starts with self-awareness, right? All starts
Absolutely.
with self-awareness. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really important. All of it's really important to understand, and I think that's the thing with coaching. When I work with clients on these things, it's half of it is putting in place the practical strategies and making suggestions and having accountability. I have, if a client's doing something big that week, I'll call them. I'll arrange to call them and check that they've done it if they want me to, and they can send me pictures to help with that accountability. It's all practical. It's all great. The other half of it is just talking about their presentation of their ADHD, to understand when these things happen. That is why, because that's so important to just understand why that's happening to you.
I guess so making that unconscious behavior conscious.
Yeah.
And so that that there's nothing wrong with you. This is why you behave the way you do, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's something I instill in the kids as well, because there is 70 to 80% genetic prevalence. So if you are an adult with ADHD with children, you are likely going to have to help your children do this too. And I think one thing my 11-year-old ADHDer is so hyper aware of his ADHD and the things he finds difficult, and it's not like an excuse that he can't do things. It's I'm going to find that really difficult, so I'm going to have to find another way to do that. And it's that awareness. It's like, God, I wish I had that when I was that age. I wish I even knew at that age that that's why that was hard, and the tendency I would have to people please or to get really emotional. And it's radical acceptance of owning it. That is just the way I am, and that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, Lisa, I'm just conscious of time.
Sure.
I could talk about this
forever,
as I know you could as well, right?
Could we just maybe just do some how to go about diagnosis very quickly before we finish? Is that
absolutely. All right? If we go through that quickly, and then if you also can tell everybody where they can find you, that would be great.
Yeah, no problem. So if there are two different routes in the UK for diagnosis. So one is through the NHS, the other is private. So just quickly, the NHS route is obviously free. What you would get from the NHS would be a psychiatrist to diagnose, and if they found that you had ADHD, would offer medication, and that would then be taken on by NHS prescription. The difficulty with that is the wait times are years. The wait times in some areas are 5 years. In my area, I'm looking at 2026, I think, for diagnosis for an adult. So obviously very good that the NHS can provide that, but the wait time is long, and they will go by the diagnostic criteria. Often, depending where you're diagnosed, can reportedly be harder through NHS. It is something that I do with clients, is do a pre-diagnosis support to work out how they present in that clinical diagnosis, because sometimes it's not very clear the things that we do, how they are represented in that clinical model. So it's something that I do help clients with doing before they're diagnosed. The second route is private, which there are many private companies who offer private psychiatrists and private prescribing nurses who do your assessment and then titrate. It's called titration, 3 months of medication where you find your correct dose. And unfortunately, that obviously is private, and so comes at a cost between the assessment itself between £600 and £1,500, depending where you go. And titration for 3 months is around £600 to £900, depending. The really important thing, whichever way you go for diagnosis, whichever way any of your listeners go, is go to the GP first, regardless, asking for a referral for ADHD. If you take with you, it's called an ASBRS.1, I probably got that wrong, screening form for ADHD, adult screening form. That is what the GP is going to give you, first of all. They're going to give you that, send you away, you're going to have to come back. If you've got ADHD, the executive function is likely that's going to take months. Go with a completed ASBRS form. It is the NHS form that indicates whether you are likely to be put forward for a referral. It's just a tick box. It's very easy. It's 1 page. So going with that, asking for a referral for ADHD, even if you're going to go private, asking for a referral for ADHD, get on the list. Then a discussion with that GP, if they put you forward for a referral, and say, will you support a shared care arrangement if I go private? And what that means is that after that 3 months of what we call titration, which is working out your dosage, if you go privately and you have to pay for that, if you have a shared care arrangement in place with your GP, and you have it in writing, it needs to be written on your notes, the GPs can then take over, the NHS can take over your prescription after that 3 months. So you will pay for medication for 3 months, but after that, it's NHS prescription. So you don't have to worry then about ongoing costs apart from your prescription charge. You also have the option through the NHS to ask for right to choose, which means that there are certain companies, private companies, that work with the NHS that often have shorter waiting lists. And so when you're in the GP, you can ask to exercise your right to choose, which means that you can indicate where you want to be diagnosed. And then that will involve searching for there's a number, I think around about 10 maybe, suppliers in the UK that work with the NHS that take on NHS clients.
Sure.
Shorter waiting lists, but not as short as if you just went to a direct private company. A direct private company, you could get an appointment within 2 weeks in some places. Right to choose, you're probably still waiting 6 to 9 months, but it's better than 3 years.
Sure. Final question, where can people find you if they want to get hold of you?
Yep, so my website is www.perspectivecounselingandcoaching.co.uk. So all my information's on there, and that's it. I'm on social media, but ADHD dysfunction, I don't tend to post much because I never know what to write.
Oh, Lisa, thank you so much. It's been such a fascinating conversation, and I've really enjoyed speaking to you. So thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll speak again soon.
Thank you very much for having me. It was lovely. Thank you.
Take care. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.